So, as I spent time in the saddle and riding with different groups or riding by myself, I found a lot of just unique little parallels that you can attribute to your time on a bicycle and some of the things that we do in business. In the way I see it is everything we do in life basically is kind of a project if you think about it. So whether it's planning to do a race or a ride, or planning something at work or planning something at home, at the end of the day, you have a start, you have a finish, and you're usually leading this. So, there's quite a few projects.
Welcome to The Change Lead, the podcast providing leaders with the insight needed to get things done in a rapidly changing and complex world. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Connect with our community of like-minded leaders on our website, thechangelead.com. Welcome to The Change Lead, with your host, Babatope Ipinyomi.
So, here's a question for you. What lessons from riding a bike can we apply to business, leadership, and projects? What can biking teach us about change? With me on the podcast today is Jason Orloske. Jason is a transformational leader. He uses effective project portfolio management to bridge the gap between organizational strategy and operational excellence. In this episode, Jason shares what he has learned about biking and business. Stay tuned. I'm sure you will find this insightful.
Hey everybody, my name is Jason Orloske. I'm talking to you from Fargo, North Dakota. And it is September. No, it is not snowing. I get that question quite a bit from the people I talk to. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here and look forward to talking to you about biking and business. Some lessons from what I like to call the back of the pack rider. So just, a little background of how I got here. This really starts in March of right around 2006. I was overweight. I had high blood pressure. I was pre-diabetic, and I had gone to the doctor, and he starts giving me this huge list of, here are the things that are wrong with you. And if you don't start making a change, you're going to have some serious health consequences down the road. And so being the person I was back then, I did absolutely nothing. I went home and literally stewed about it for about a year. Then I went back for another checkup, and my blood pressure was actually higher, even after being on blood pressure medication. So I had a very good friend at the time, and I confided in him, and I said, hey, I'm going through a few things, and I told him what was happening. And he said, I got a great idea. I'm having the same problems, and him and I were about the same age and in kind of the same areas of life. And he said, I'm doing a 12-mile bike race in about 6 weeks, and you should do it with me. And the first thing I said is, there's no way I could bike 12 miles. I mean, that's a long ways. I could barely probably get on my bike right now. And he says, hey, listen, you're not going to do it today. You're going to do it in 6 weeks. So make a plan, make a training plan. I mean, you make plans for a living, right? And he really kind of called me out. I was doing project management at the time. And yeah, I can make plans. And so I went online, found a simple training plan that was actually 15 miles. So I thought, well, I'll do a couple extra little miles in there. 6 weeks came, race day, and I did it. It wasn't easy, but I rode my 12 miles. I finished. And at that point, I got a little bit of confidence. Like, hey, I did this. I should do it again. And a few weeks later, I did another one. It was like just a quick 10-miler. And then another and another. And over time, the distances kept getting longer. The paces kept getting faster. So since that day in 2007, I have done almost 100 bike races, ranging from anywhere from like a 5K sprint all the way up to 242 miles across an entire state on gravel roads, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I'll tell you first thing, I have never won a race. Never, ever. I'm usually the back half of the pack, but I have fun trying. I think the best I've ever done is came in 5th place out of 6 people, and the only reason I did that is because the 6th place guy dropped. So I'm not fast, I'm determined, and I'm resilient. But over the miles, because I've done countless thousands of miles, I found a lot of parallels between biking and my professional career as a project portfolio manager. And I started doing that back in 1999. So, as I spent time in the saddle and riding with different groups or riding by myself, I found a lot of just unique little parallels that you can attribute to your time on a bicycle and, and some of the things that we do in business. In the way I see it is everything we do in life basically is kind of a project if you think about it. So whether it's planning to do a race or a ride or planning something at work or planning something at home, at the end of the day, you have a start, you have a finish, and you're usually leading this. So, there's quite a few projects. So there's 5 areas that I'm going to focus on today. The first is really defining your why. The second is identifying those goals and action plans. The third is failures in taking risks, and the fourth is going to be success, is being a team event, and the last one is being visible versus being invisible. So if you're a cyclist, you'll probably really relate to some of these topics, and even if you're not, hopefully you find a few good lessons learned along the way. So first of all, just defining the why. I get this. It's an easy question. It's a one-word question. Why? With a very complicated answer. So when I first started cycling, I just wanted to get in shape. I wanted to lower my blood pressure. I wanted to be around a little bit longer for my family. We were just having our first child at that time, so I wanted to be there for him. But over the time, it really evolved into something more. If you've ever done a race, whether it's running, biking, whatever it is, you get to that finish line, you get the 30-cent medal and half a banana. That's really what you get through all the pain and agony of the day. So there's always something more that drives people. And when somebody asks me why I do what I do, especially with biking, it's hard to explain, but I try my best. And the same can really go for our careers. I became an accidental project manager back in 1999. Somebody called a project manager, would show up at our team meetings every week, tell us that we weren't doing our jobs, that we were lazy, that we should be fired. And so finally one day I rose my hand and I said, I think we can do something a little bit different and be more successful. And he threw the project plan at me and says, okay, Slick, if you can do better, go for it. So that's how my project management career started. So I can save that story for another time. It was a good one. But, for our projects, why is a question that we have to ask, especially for us as project managers or leaders of teams, leading different groups that are involved. Why is going to be an important question, because one of the things I'll ask is, how does this align with the organization strategy? Why are we doing this? How does this align? Because if we're doing somebody's pet project, which I've done by accident in the past because I didn't ask those questions, could lead to no business value. Or if you're doing a pet project for somebody and their boss finds out you're doing it, usually you get in trouble because you didn't ask those questions. So don't be afraid to ask, why? Why now? Why this? Why that? I tell people this is so important because if you don't ask why, especially with your project teams or those stakeholders that are involved, they don't understand the importance and they're not going to care, right? They've got their other day job that they need to do. They've got other priorities. They've got other things that needs to happen. So if you can't explain to them why this project or why this effort is so important, and how they as an individual are so important to contributing, you're never going to get the buy-in. And again, this is one of my lessons learned because I didn't ask those why questions. And one time it almost got me fired because I didn't. I was taking on somebody's pet project. I never asked why, because they were a CFO. When the CEO found out, he was mad, but he wasn't mad at the CFO. He was mad at me because I let it go. And so what ended up happening especially with that project, is there was uncontrolled changes. The team lost confidence in me. And eventually, when things really went off the rails and leadership found out about it, they killed the project right away to the tune of an $800,000 loss. But why is going to be one of the most critical questions that you can ask, especially at the front end of any initiative that you take on. So highly recommend you do that. And it does take courage sometimes to get that why question asked. So the next, the number 2 was goals. Once you do have that goal, is nothing without action plans. So me personally, I love goals. So I have 2 sets of them. First of all, I had what I'll call the before 50 goals, because I'm almost 50. So I made those at 45 with the intent of finishing them by the age of 50. So got another 1.5 years to go. But, then I start to break down those yearly goals into something more, more tangible. Or I'm taking those 5-year goals and then breaking them down into yearly. So making those a little bit more tangible. And then putting some dates to them, because once I do that, I start to have a sense of urgency to actually get it done. So once you have a date to it, now you can commit, and now you can start your planning process. So I'll give you an example. This year, this has been a bucket list item of mine. I've wanted to do a half Ironman. I got friends that have done fulls. I've got friends that have done the halves, and they said, you should do it. You should try it. And I said, well, I get in the water, I go to the bottom. So I'm always afraid of swimming. But, I finally said, okay, let's do this. I said 2023 is the year. I picked a date. I picked one of the races. I signed up for it. Now I had my date. And then I had that goal, I had it set, I was committed, now I could start to plan. So taking that date, I work backwards into, here's when I have to start. So then I made a detailed training plan. And I'm sure, as many of you have happened, life comes up, right? So I was supposed to run 5 miles that day. Well, I had a business trip, or my kid was sick, or I had to go to, some other event. So what I have learned over the years is we can detail down to the most minute, even down to the hour. And that plan is only going to be as good as the day you wrote it out. Because as soon as life happens, you need to adjust. So what I ended up doing was, okay, I'll write down the dailies, knowing that I won't hit every day, and that's okay. So I always tallied things up at the end of the week and said, okay, if I can really stick either to the weekly amounts or close to them, I'm on the right track. And as one person told me, nobody in probably the history of the world has ever kept up with those training plans, because they're just too, they're too detailed, and nobody, unless you don't have a family or anything else going on, doesn't have that time. So I followed it to the best of my ability, really focused on the week. And then just finished it up a couple weeks ago. I got to the finish line, said I'll never do another one, and I'm signed up for one in 2024. But that's a different story that my wife is still talking to me about. But if you think of translating that to work, you don't, if you're a project manager, and I did this early in my career, if you develop a 400-line project plan, it's probably good the day you wrote it. And then the next day you could throw it away, because things change, so fast, especially now. I would say, in what I mentor younger project leaders on, is don't focus on the individual days, right? Focus on those key dates. So if you have the end goal in mind, work backwards. Usually you have certain things that need to be done by a certain time. So for example, one of my last clients, because I do consulting, we had a major program. We had a release date. So once we selected the release date, we knew that testing had to be done 3 weeks in advance. We had to know then development had to be done, at least 1 week in advance before testing began. So we were able to work backwards. And within an hour, we had a straw man of a plan. And even though we wouldn't commit to it at that point because we needed to fine tune it, 80-20 rule, we were 80% there in an hour. Yeah. And then we just focused on those key dates. We didn't worry about all the little minutia because, again, life happens at work too. Other production fires came up. People left the company. Some people were moving around. There was a reorg. We met our date, but we, instead of focusing on the individual day, we focused on those key delivery times. And that really helped us out. So again, we were starting with the goal of here's what we want to do. We selected that end date, and then we were able to work backwards, really create those action plans that got us to success. The third area is just failures and risks. If you are a leader, you're going to take risks. You're going to have failures. But one question I would ask everybody is it really failing if you learned from it? An example is a couple of years ago, I had my first bike race where I got a DNF. I did not finish. I looked at the weather forecast and I was scared when I got on my bike that day. It called for high winds, then rain, and then the rain was going to turn to sleet and then eventually to snow. And I said, you know what, I'm going anyway. I've been biked in the rain before. Well, when you start at 45 degrees and it goes to 28 degrees, it's a major jump. So at one point, I got to the halfway mark. I actually had to chisel ice off my glasses because it had gotten so cold. And at that point, I called it quits. Later, I learned that 55% of the racers didn't even show up that day, and then the majority didn't finish. But that was my first time I said, call it quits. It was my first failure. I did not finish what I set out to do. But then I really took a step back and did a retrospect on it, because I was doing a much further gravel race, later in the year. I took a lot of lessons away from that. The first question I asked is, what went right? Okay, my bike setup was right. The food I had on was right. All my electronics were right. What went wrong? Well, weather. I didn't have the right attire. It was water resistant, not waterproof. And believe me, there's a big difference. And so I took the time to really understand what went well first, and then what didn't go well, and then learn from that. So I was able to apply it to a future event, and it helped out quite a bit. Translating that, risks and failures to what you do on a daily basis. My first project failure, and it is still my largest, to the tune of $2 million. This project was going to be a game changer for the company. So one of the first things I did when I was handed, it's told, hey, you're going to lead this, is I looked at who am I going to involve? Who are the stakeholders involved? And in a company of 17,000, there's a lot of looking that you can do. So I looked and I documented all these people. And we kicked the project off. I traveled internationally to this company's headquarters. Traveled all around the U.S. doing some different market research. So we spent a lot of money. We were doing a lot of the development. And then one day I was pulled into a room and there was 4 people in this room. And they said, hi, I'm so-and-so from the new product development group. And I thought, I've never heard of these people before. They said, if we didn't approve your project, it's not real and you're done. The project is henceforth killed. And I was blown away. I thought, this is my first major project, and I botched it up because I didn't understand who these people were. So yeah, that was a real winner. But what I took away from it was, even if you think you know who you need to talk to and the stakeholders that are involved, look deeper. And if I would have asked maybe just a few more questions, I would have eventually found this group, because somebody I was involving quite heavily, they were very aware of this team. And they knew I should have talked to them, but I didn't ask the question of, hey, should I have them come to a few informational meetings? So, I put a lot of that back on myself and said, I should have asked more questions, more stakeholder assessment. Since that time, even if I think I have everybody identified, I will go even just a little bit deeper. But every project that you take on is a risk to the company. Every project that you lead, it will have risk. Take the time to understand what the risks are early. Involve your team. What could go wrong? How can we mitigate those now? Is this kind of a high, medium, and low risk? I do not have all the answers. I consider myself the dumbest person in the room. That's why we have the smart people on the project teams, right? So they can identify things that I couldn't even think of. And I guarantee you will not catch them all, and that's okay. You can catch the majority of them, but things happen. I had in a bike race, my handlebars literally fell off my bike. They broke. And I never would have expected that to happen. Even recently, one of our project risks was potential employee attrition. Well, we figured maybe 1 or 2 people would leave. We had 10 in a very short amount of time. So we could not backfill them fast enough. That really threw off our project schedule. But there are risks. We can mitigate them as much as possible, but you're not going to catch them all. Sometimes there are bumps in the road. Sometimes they can definitely lead to ultimate failure, but do the best you can. And I know sometimes risks are very hard to get uncovered. The next is success is really dependent on a team. So back in 2021, there's this race called the Day Across Minnesota. So it starts on the border of the state of Minnesota here in the U.S., and then it goes on gravel roads literally across the state, 242 miles on gravel roads. You have 24 hours to do this. And again, it was one of those bucket list items. I said, I'm going to do this. It was the last year they were actually going to do this race. And so, started at midnight, you have till the following midnight. My wife and her friend kind of did the support throughout the night and met me at certain places along the route. And when I finished, I remember somebody saying to me, well, you did it. And I thought, no, I didn't do it. I didn't do it alone. I may have been on my bike pedaling. I was simply following a line on my GPS telling me to turn right or turn left or to do whatever. And there was times it was a battle. But if it wasn't for my wife and that friend of ours meeting me at certain places, I couldn't have replenished my water, my food, gotten certain, changed out a couple of pieces of clothing. So I wouldn't have been successful without them. So even though you may be out there by yourself, there's a team that has supported you at least along the way. When it comes to our work life, everything is a team. You can't do anything alone. And again, I will tell you, I'm not the smartest person in the room. I don't have all the answers. I can't do it all myself. As a project management professional, I don't do the work. I get the work done through others. So, and that's a quote by Lee Lampert, if you've heard of him. And it's really true. I engage a team. They are the ones that actually do the work. I am kind of like the ringmaster in the center, guiding traffic, and then also stopping those things that can come in and throw people off course. I am huge in building rapport with my team members. Both, I have team members all across the U.S., all across the world, and when I'm starting something new, even if we kick the project off as a group, I find time to meet with everybody individually, even if it's simply 10 minutes. It is time consuming. It's hard some days because you have different time zones, different things to consider. But what I'm really trying to do is build rapport, build trust with them, and then during team meetings, not only am I trying to build trust with team members, but I'm trying to build trust amongst team members. I want them to communicate. Don't always bring me a problem. Bring the other smart person the problem. Then when you have a solution, let's talk about it. And then we can figure it out from there. And I am very humble about that because when issues inevitably do come up, I will be the first one to say, I don't know what to do here. Can you help me? And create that psychological safety within the team. If I'm willing to put ego aside and say, I can't do this, I don't know, I need your help, they are more than willing to jump in. So really engaging that team, to help, drive results, get over the issues. And then when we complete something, hit a milestone, project complete, whatever it is, I give them all the credit. I mean, we go celebrate. I tell their bosses, hey, look at what these people did. They did awesome. I love working with them. I hope to work with them again. The biggest compliment you can ever get is, well, I loved working with Jason. I want to work with Jason again on the next project. And that is, that's been one of the key career moments I've had when people say that. So, every success, no matter how big, how small, whatever it is, it really is a team event. And then last is being visible versus being invisible. And it was actually earlier this year. I was out early in the morning biking, and it was a beautiful morning. I'm watching the sunrise. It's June. So June in Fargo, North Dakota, the sun is literally starting to come up about 4:15 in the morning. It's awesome. So you can get out there and it's bright enough. So I'm watching the sunrise and I see something in the distance, not quite sure what it is. But when I get there, it's a fog bank. And I went from being able to see for miles, because there's no hills in Fargo, North Dakota, to seeing maybe 20 feet in front of me. And it's thick. So as I'm pedaling, I have one little light on the back of my bike, and I'm worried that the car that's coming up that I can hear coming won't see me, and it's possible I can get hit. So I want to be as visible as possible. So I'm just trying to find ways to do that, but it was very hard. Contrast that to the week before, when I go past a house and I see two German shepherds sitting on their front stoop, just kind of sleeping a little bit. And I don't want to be seen, not at all, because I don't want these dogs to wake up and go, oh, look, I'm going to chase this guy. So there's times that you're going to want to be visible. There's times where you might want to think you're invisible. But as a leader, as somebody that's at a company that you want to become more and more, start to rise up in that company, you're going to be more and more visible. When I was early in my career, I was the guy who kind of sat in the back of the room, didn't say a word, and then hoped that nobody would look at me, call on me, ask me a question. I just wanted to stay out of the limelight. I didn't want to be in it. Excuse me. But then as I started to get more and more in my career, I thought, well, if I stay invisible, nobody will notice me. I'll never get anywhere. So the best example I got of this is in 2013, when Obamacare in the U.S. was going to be put into effect. I was working at a healthcare company, and right before we went into this executive meeting that was to really kind of kick this thing off, somebody grabbed me and said, hey, from a program standpoint, you're going to be really heavily involved. I didn't know what that meant, but I went into the meeting anyway. So there was the CEO, CFO, any C-level was in this room along with their direct reports. I was out of my league, but I was okay with that. I thought, I'm going to learn a lot. So as I'm listening to the conversations, it was all IT will do this, IT will do this, IT will do this. And when people were talking about the process changes, things weren't meshing up. I thought to myself, they don't even know their own current processes. They have no idea what it's going to be in the future. So as we got along into this, the CIO goes, yep, and IT will do everything and blah, blah, blah. And then he looks at me and he goes, and Jason is going to be our program manager. And my mouth just kind of went, what? I had no idea I was going to actually deliver this. So the COO looks at me and goes, well, what do you think? And instead of taking the invisible route and saying, yep, I said, I think everything we're talking about is flawed. And here's why. So they had this little diagram up on the board. I actually stood up, went to it. I said, everything here is dependent on technology doing something, but you have no business input. You have a business input into the process here, but we don't know what it is. We have an output to an operational group here. We don't know how they consume it. And what I'm hearing isn't meshing up between what everybody is saying too. I said, my approach would be to get all of our operational business partners into a room with technology, map out our current process end to end. And somebody goes, well, that'll take weeks. I said, it'll be weeks well spent. I said, look at this as your investment. So once we develop this as-is process, now we can go about noting, hey, things are going to change here. Things are going to change here. Things are going to change here. And then we can put plans in place to make sure that where those things change, technology is ready, operations is ready, we're able to do what we need to do. And there was a little bit of an argument between the CIO, COO. So as they went back and forth, they said, we need to get our operational partners, involved with this. And so the CEO looks at me, looks at the CIO and goes, you two, make it happen. And that was it. And so I really stuck my neck out there, became visible. There was people that said, hey, this is a great approach. We've never done this before. We think it's going to be fantastic because, here's why. The CIO brought me into his office and told me never to interrupt him like that again or ever contradict him again. Thankfully, he was only around for 2 more months and then was suddenly looking for new opportunities, right? So, if you want to be a leader, you're going to have to be visible. You're going to have to stick your neck out there. People are going to have to see you. So it is okay to be visible, and don't try to hide from it. So that is it. That is everything I wanted to cover today. Again, thank you very much for having me. If you want to follow me, please let's connect on LinkedIn or catch me on my blog at btgconsulting.biz. Shoot me a note anytime, and I look forward to working with or communicating with folks in the future. So connect anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to my conversation with Jason. If you'd like to connect with Jason, check the show notes to find details. If this episode was of value to you, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcast. Leaving a review is the absolute best way to support the podcast and ensure I continue to have great guests on the show. You can tune in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Audible, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, the Change Lead website, and many more. To continue the conversation, please connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day and see you next time.